I like the, trying to figure out ideas for the younger kids, middle school and elementary school, changing the temperature of the environment for the brine, and changing over to celery juice, seeing how the pickling process is affected using celery juice rather than the regular salt. Just came off the top of my head as well. Have you compared iodized salt versus non-iodized salt as brine?
A good salt should have between 70 and 80 different trace minerals in it. So sodium chloride is not the only mineral present in the salt. It's got a broad spectrum. But when they refine table salt, they take almost all of those minerals out, except for the sodium and the chloride. And then they bleach it, and then they add caking agents, and they end up with a product that's really not the same. And we use these minerals for the process of fermentation. So if you're removing the minerals from the salt itself is not going to produce fermentation like we want. Could do one on water. You know, what happens if you just use tap water, or you use spring water, or you use the alkaline water?
The base of your brine. Okay.
Yeah, or maybe what if you tried coconut water instead of, regular water? You try different liquids for the brine.
Right.
Would that be a possible
That would
idea?
absolutely be a neat possibility. As long as what's changing about the experiment, you choose one thing. That's called your independent variable. And the one factor that you change is the one thing that you measure. You make sure it's a specific measurement in your control that matches your instructions. And then as you make those changes, those are your test groups. So you have a control group that follows the instructions, and a test group or two, or possibly even three, that varies based on one factor, your independent variable. And then whatever you're measuring, you'll make a data table and collect your data, whether it's over time or at the end of the fermentation process. We've got changing the brine, maybe adding, you said coconut juice? Do you think that would taste good?
Coconut water.
Or coconut water?
Well, it depends what you're making. I mean, if you're making pickled peppers, probably not. But if you're, let's say you're doing jicama and blueberries, or...
Now, see, I always thought that pickling was more like things you did with cucumbers and cabbage and the vegetable end of that. What are some of the fruits that you can pickle?
Well, pretty much everything can be pickled.
I know, I grew up, and pickled eggs was one of the big things that I enjoyed. So even doing a variation of what things you're pickling, as long as it's keeping everything else, choose that one thing you're going to change, and then keeping everything else in that experiment constant.
Now, getting back to that coconut water, we have a recipe in our instructional recipe booklet for pickled pear ice cream. And you pickle the pears when they're a little bit green, and then you throw the solution in a blender and then freeze it and run it through a juicer to make ice cream.
Oh,
but that would be interesting to try coconut water for the liquid.
For the liquid with the pear. And that sounds actually very yummy.
See, you never know.
Try that. I saw that you wanted to measure the levels of acidity over a number of days, and that kind of, that would be great for science fair, but check with the teacher, see if they want the child to do a controlled experiment. A controlled experiment is where you actually just change one factor. If they're doing a research experiment and they're studying acidity and how the levels of bacteria, how that affects levels of bacteria, that would be a great research project. And that still is acceptable as a science fair project. You just have to make sure whatever the teacher's expectations are.
So that one doesn't really work for a controlled group then?
Because you're really just running the actual instructions through and watching what's happening. So it's more like an observational study.
I see.
And that's okay. Observational studies are wonderful. Sometimes I have had students have asked me, well, could I stand at a corner and see how many people talk on their cell phones when they're driving? Well, yes, but that's an observational study. Could I put bird feeders out and have different colors and see which ones the birds like better? Yes, but that's still an observational study. So you can't control it. Nature kind of takes its course. But of course, that is still a wonderful type of science fair experiment.
Okay, that's good to know. That clarifies it quite a bit. So what other ones do you see that would be a good idea for a Perfect Pickler experiment?
Well, I like the one on changing the temperatures, and the temperature of the environment or the temperature of the brine. I wonder if that would affect how long it takes the fermentation process to occur. So that would be my second, I guess if we want to say favorite,
Okay.
that would be my second one
And
I
what
would
age
like to
level
try.
do you think that would be good for?
Well, you know, I have a daughter that's 10 years old, and she just chose her science project this year. I think that she would enjoy something like this. She's in 5th grade. So I would say middle school or upper elementary school could probably easily handle something like this. If you have a 9th or 10th grader, it would still be interesting. Heck, I'm an adult. I would.
You want to do it? Get
I
the
would
kids
do
to
it.
play.
You know, if we move away from a controlled experiment where you have to choose one thing that's changed and you move to more of something of an observational study, the Perfect Pickler is, especially if you have a microscope, to put some of the sampling of the brine under a microscope every day or every other day to see the growth of the bacteria, the different change in the bacteria growth. Also possibly, what else we're going to measure? Levels of acid, the acidity over time. We're going to measure the bacteria over time. Any of the factors within the experiment that you're going to within the process. And if you change just one thing and then have the control group be the original instructions and then the one thing you've changed and you compare the results. And it's a very simple process. And at the end, you get to eat your experiment, so that's even a bonus on that one. And I was just so much more impressed with the health benefits of this. I've already shared it with friends, and I can't wait for my daughter to try it too. And we eat lots of fresh food, so. In addition to that, we were talking about possibly testing pickling on our traditional grocery store foods versus organic foods.
Oh, conventional versus organic, yeah.
Yes, so that could even be another controlled experiment that they could try.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, thank you so much for letting us come and visit you in your classroom, and
Well, thank
we
you
certainly
very
can't
much.
wait to get started on our science fair projects this fall. And hopefully you've gained some great ideas and are ready to jump in with some new projects again. So thank you for joining us here at the Perfect Pickler. Happy pickling!